Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So after the insane success of the first Conjuring, we got a sequel in 2016, and it was actually really good? Well, that's pretty rare. Now, while I do think that the original was scarier overall, The Conjuring 2 does have its creepy moments. In fact, I even think that this one improves on a lot of things compared to its predecessor. But how did the movie manage to be so scary? Once again, there are a lot of little things and small details that work pretty well to convey a sense of fear. So today, we'll look at the hidden horror in The Conjuring 2. Just as a quick recap, in the movie we follow the Hodgson family in 1977. They slowly discover that there might be an evil entity in their home, and eventually the mother gets help from the Warrens. They then realize that the youngest daughter, Janet, is showing signs of demonic possession. And you may have noticed that there are a lot of things adding to the creepiness in the background. For example, towards the beginning of the movie, the youngest son walks around alone late at night to get a glass of water. On his way back up, we can see an old man sitting in the corner, barely noticeable. This is Bill Wilkins, the previous owner who died in that chair. He's one of the spirits trapped in the house. And look, I know I'm not the first one to bring this up, and it's not my goal to just show you the Easter eggs slightly off screen. There are quite a few great videos that do that already, but for the first part of the video, we'll take a look at a few of these and explain the potential meaning behind them and their relevance to this story, because they might actually be used to reveal certain details about the evil spirits and the Hodgson family. Anyways, only minutes later, the mother goes downstairs, and there she sees Janet in the same chair that Bill was in. This sequence does two things. It already gets us to think about the chair and makes us associate it with something strange, which gets brought up quite a few times, right up to the end. But much more importantly, it gives us a pretty big hint as to where the story ends up going. Now, when you watch the first movie, it took a while to understand what the demon wanted to do, since everyone was experiencing the attacks about equally. This made us think that the Bathsheba spirit was after the whole family. It's only much later that we see it possessing the mother. But here, by showing Janet in the same chair as Bill, it gives us an early clue as to what the spirit wants to do: possess Janet. This is confirmed later on when we see Janet channeling Bill's spirit. And there are a lot of things going on just behind our characters that can give us much more information about what's happening before it's outright revealed. For example, one of the first times we see the main villain, Valak, who has the look of the creepy nun, we see it emerging from a shadow cast by a painting. And this painting is the parent family home from the first movie. Again, it's only much later that Lorraine tells Ed that Valak had an impact on her since the events that we saw in the first movie. So the demon, who could have appeared anywhere, came specifically out of the parent house drawing. And this might symbolize how Valak was already there, affecting the Warrens during the parent case. Now, James Wan is no stranger to hiding things in plain sight. He's done it in the first Saw movie, and there's even a small part in the first Insidious that does this. But here, he also hid the demon's name in the background, which is significant because for the Warrens, knowing the demon's name gives them power over it. And you can see Valak's name all over the Warrens' house. One time we see this is when the Warrens are eating breakfast, and we can see Valak spelled out behind both Ed and Lorraine. Again, I know I'm not the first one to bring this up, but here's why I think it's so cool. Later on, we see Lorraine confronting the nun, asking its name. She then unknowingly scratches Valak in her Bible. But even though it's not shown in the movie, this is probably not the first time she's done this. Since Valak has had numerous encounters with the Warrens, I think they've subconsciously been writing down its name the whole time, so it wouldn't just be an Easter egg for no reason. Just how Lorraine unknowingly writes down the name, the Warrens have already done this by rearranging their furniture decorations in similar ways. Maybe Valak has been giving them its name and making them write it down the whole time, and they never knew. This would really fit in with how Valak is messing with the family throughout the movie. But there are also a few strange things going on which have to do with how the jump scares are presented. And this is quite weird, and I don't think I've seen this too often. So there's a scene where Janet is locked in a room where there's a lot of paranormal activity. When she's in there, all the crosses on the wall start turning upside down. As we slowly go across the room, we eventually look at an eerily dark corner. But if you look just hard enough, you can clearly see Bill Wilkins' outline before he even jumps out. And I thought this was really unusual, because jump scares are supposed to be abrupt, and they could have easily made this area completely black. Yet here, it outright shows you what the scary thing will be, but surprisingly, it really works. At least it did on me. I would lean forward and be like, what the hell is that? And before you can really register what it is, it jumps out at you. This gives them a really different feel. A rather obvious example of this is when the mother is in the basement with Ed looking at the water damage. She initially sees a dark figure approaching Ed, but when he turns around to check, nothing's there. Then when the mom looks in the water, we see Bill Wilkins once again. But much like the previous scare we talked about, the noise actually comes a split second after we see him. We're given just a hair of time to process what's going on, which makes it hit a little bit differently. It's really subtle, but it was also used in the first Conjuring movie, even though it's used a lot more here. In the original, during the very memorable wardrobe scare, we see the witch revealed on top of the closet and it's silent. Only a fraction of a second later does the noise come through. Here it also happens on a really subtle level earlier on. When Lorraine sees the nun for the first time, it comes out of this painting that Ed drew. But shortly before it emerges, we can actually see the painting change. Its eyes start glowing in the dark, increasingly more aggressive. Of course, it could be that Ed drew this thing in radium paint only to prank his family and pointlessly scare the crap out of anyone who tries walking to the bathroom at night. But I think the likelier answer is that it shows that the painting is becoming alive shortly before it really happens, because in the Conjuring movies, the main villains tend to have these glowing eyes. And I mean, the glowing eyes were much less pronounced 1 second ago, so we're given small clues as to what the scares will actually be. Now this isn't done with all the scary moments. There are plenty of times where we don't really get a heads up as to what will happen, and there's a much more traditional approach. But it's cool how they change things up a little with this different kind of scare. Looking beyond this, however, there's something that the movie does which gives some of the scary scenes a pretty sinister tone. So when we first see the nun, the moment has a really eerie, chilling feel. At least I always felt it did.
Who's that?
I believe that one of the things that makes it stand out is the nearly perfect symmetrical framing. Usually when we see the Hodgsons or the Warrens, they're at a bit of an angle because that's more comfortable to look at. But here the nun is dead center. She's right in front of us and it gives the moment a much more confrontational tone. This happens again after Lorraine approaches the picture of the nun before it jumps out at her. Once again, it's filmed in a more or less symmetrical way. You can see it again and again in the scenes where something scary is about to happen or currently happening. For example, when it first becomes public knowledge that the Hodgsons are experiencing something strange, a few local paranormal investigators, not the Warrens, interview the family to see what's going on. There, while Janet is speaking to Maurice Gross, one of the people wanting to know if they're faking it, she channels Bill Wilkins. In this conversation, Bill reveals who was possessing her and the details of his death. And again, we quickly get a number of symmetrical shots. This head-on look makes it much more uncomfortable than if we're at an angle, and here it's used among other things to raise and release tension. But even though the first Conjuring was a lot more chilling with bigger and better scares, this movie did something that, while not being quite as terrifying, made the scares a lot more meaningful. Towards the end, for example, Ed is locked in the house trying to save Janet from jumping to her death on a sharp tree spike. But Lorraine warns him not to go since she had a vision that he'll die if he doesn't wait for her to also find a way in. Here Ed is at a crossroads. Does he go upstairs to help Janet and risk losing his own life, or does he wait for Lorraine to find a way in to ensure his own safety but risk losing Janet? He has to make a tough decision, and no matter which one he picks, he risks losing the other. This is one of the best moments in my opinion, since it highlights the Warrens' weakness. Compare this to the original where they were pretty much invincible, but here they are forced to proceed based on a best guess. Moments like these give everything we see a bit more weight. We see that the Warrens are also merely human, and they don't have all the answers. This is much more believable and leads us to sympathize with them a lot more. So shortly after he decides to enter, Ed gets hit in the head with a piece of a metal valve as it's spraying hot steam on him. As soon as he gets closer to saving Janet, he gets hurt. Now if we were to look at the end of The Conjuring 1, when everything was going crazy, Ed still seemed in control. It never seemed like he was really challenged, but here it's much more complicated. Ed physically struggles as he's knocked down. His vision is blurred and he has an injury on his head. He has to put up a real fight to achieve his goal, and he's severely outmatched by Valak. But this shows how dead serious he is about helping the Hodgsons. Even if his odds of succeeding are relatively low, he still does it. If it were easy, it wouldn't really seem that threatening and it wouldn't mean that much, regardless of how many jump scares there are. Another critical moment comes when it seems like Janet is faking her possession. One of the investigators and skeptics set up a camera, and it films Janet as she smashes a bunch of plates intentionally by herself, which makes it look like she's doing all of this for attention. As they're watching the footage, which seemingly disproves the haunting, we see both the Warrens and Maurice completely defeated as they feel like they've been totally betrayed by this family that's gained their trust. Here, Ed and Lorraine once again have to choose. Do they leave the family where they saw that something weird is going on, knowing they won't get the help they need, or do they stay at the cost of their own reputation while also disobeying the church? This is an important choice since we've seen them earlier working on the Amityville case. That one supposedly turned out to be a hoax, so their credibility was already significantly hurt. Also, Lorraine wasn't 100% convinced that there was something wrong with the Hodgsons, unlike with the parent family where she immediately sent something off. The Warrens are a bit more lost, and their vulnerabilities are completely exposed. This is an utter 180 to the last one. There it felt like, regardless of what happened, they always had a plan and knew exactly what to do. But here they're clearly overwhelmed, and we see them struggle with a case. Also, it's not like they always do the right thing when faced with these options. In this case, they choose to leave and prepare to head home, which doesn't feel quite right. There is a real setback, and technically speaking, this is a basic plot point that you'll see in many movies. The moment about 3/4 in where the heroes decide to give up because they're not ready to face the challenge. However, since many horror movies are such easy money, it's not uncommon for good storytelling to be completely ignored in favor of more jump scares, so it was good to see that they actually tried to tell a good story. And all of this makes the scares a lot more meaningful and they sit with you longer. The scares feel like they matter. The same goes for the haunted family, by the way. The parent family was pretty happy to begin with. Yes, they've had their hardships, but we didn't really see any of that, and it seems like the demon was the only problem for them. But with the Enfield case, we see that the kids get in trouble at school and they struggle with bullying. When they come home, there's a single mother who is completely overwhelmed by her 4 kids, especially since one of them has a stutter. She's just asking to have a normal, less stressful life. We see that they're not doing so well, and then they get kicked while they're down while they have to deal with the evil spirit. We actually want to see them overcoming their problems, of which the demon is only one part. This is pretty rare in horror movies. Most of the time the characters don't really get much of a backstory and the events just rush by them as they get spooked by a ghost a few times. But the scary moments hit much harder when we care for the people it's happening to. That's why in the Saw sequels, after like the 100th trap, it doesn't feel that crazy because we've only known the people in them for about 15 seconds. If it happens to someone we don't care about, well, we don't really care. Doesn't matter how violent or scary it is. By the way, some of the techniques used in the first movie to make you uncomfortable make a comeback here. We especially see a lot more rolling than in the first one, but there are also different tricks. Now when the scary things start happening to the Hodgson family, there's a much stronger feeling of fear from the family in my opinion, much more so than the first one. It seems like they always experience a greater sense of shock when they see something supernatural. When the kids first get attacked by the demon, Janet gets a bite mark on her shoulder. They show this to their mother, who quickly checks out the room. In there, she looks under the bed but only discovers the Ouija board the girls have been hiding. She thinks they're playing some sort of prank on her and tells them to get back to sleep. Then suddenly a dresser bumps against the door, after which the mother sees that the girls weren't lying. One thing you can quickly notice here are these little arcs that are commonly done. More often than not, when they see something scary, we do this motion where we go around them as well as closer. We talked a little bit about this in the Saw video, where we do a circular motion around Amanda to highlight a sense of confusion, and it has a similar effect here. The spinning around the character underlines the sense of shock they're feeling. Another example of this is when Billy is alone during one of the first nights. There he sees one of his toys unexplainably drive into his room. He then for the first time knows that something is wrong with the house, and as he realizes this, we do an arc where we spiral closer to him. This movement immerses us in the scene as it gives us a deeper understanding of how the family members feel. Not just an understanding, but we're closer to feeling the same level of confusion and being overwhelmed that they feel. Anyways, those were some of the things that, to me, made The Conjuring 2 a lot scarier. All the small details give it much more of a replay value, as you can discover new things that add to the story the second and third time you watch it. And the many strong story elements not only give it momentum, but also a lot more meaning, so that the scares actually carry some weight. Thank you guys so much for watching, I hope you liked it and that I get to see you guys in the next video. Bye guys.